What up, my friends? Welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing one of my favorite videos that I do every month, which is my book wrap up for the previous month. So we're going to be discussing all the books that I read in the month of January. Now, when I do these, just to let you know, I don't give out any spoilers. I try to avoid them as much as possible. There may be some little hints, but for the most part, it's spoiler free. I discuss a little summary about the book, and then I also give it a rating. This rating is just based on my emotions when I'm done reading the book. I don't have any fancy scale. And then if it's a book that features any type of spice, I also give you a rating on spice. That way you know before heading into it in case that makes you uncomfortable. In the month of January, I read 25 books, but I will say that a few of them were short stories or novellas, so don't get too excited. Somewhere between like 15 and 17 full-size books, and then a few short stories and novellas. Okay, so I had decided to start my year off with a Megan Quinn novel because I absolutely love Megan Quinn. If you haven't read any Megan Quinn books, she does romantic comedy, and I feel like she's just refreshing is the best word that I can use for her. So I started off with The Lineup by Megan Quinn, and this is the third book in the Brentwood Boys series. Okay, so this book follows Dottie, and she's been harboring a secret crush towards the one and only Jason Orson, who happens to be a famous baseball player who was recently traded to the Chicago Rebels. Her assistant makes a boo-boo, and she ends up doing a very large donation towards Jason's charity and wins a date night with him. I really enjoyed this book. It's a spicy romance book. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and for spice factor, I gave it a 2 out of 5. Jason is one of my favorite book boyfriends of all time. He's very quirky, but he also has like that baseball player mentality that you kind of come to know and love in romance books. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody besides me, but I felt like he was so attentive, he was so thoughtful. The only reason why this wasn't a 5-star for me is because towards the end of the book, his entire personality really changes. Overall, though, I just love this book. I thought it had all of the classic Megan Quinn moments that I absolutely love. It was such a great way to start the year. The next book that I read was King of Pride by Anna, I don't know if it's Anna or Anna Huang. I probably pronounced both the first and last name wrong. This one I gave a 3 out of 5, and Spice I gave a 2 out of 5. It's like a spicy romance, in case anybody was wondering. This followed a book that I gave a 5-star to. I think it was called King of Wrath. So I was excited to move on in the series. This follows Kai, who is in line to be CEO of his family's company. But it's 8 years earlier than he expected. So he needs to kind of clean up his reputation. However, he keeps getting distracted by a certain bartender that's making that a little bit harder than he expected. So this one was just not a love for me. I just felt like there was a major disconnect with the characters. I just didn't understand their connection. You know, when they say opposites attract, I don't think these opposites attracted. I felt like the storyline was really bland and a little boring. So it felt like the spicy scenes were trying to come in and take up the real estate where plot should have been, which would be fine, except because I mentioned the connection and chemistry wasn't there for me. It really fell flat. I will say the last third of the book did pull a lot of emotions for me, and I felt like the main female character has a lot of development, but overall this is just not one that I think you should rush to reading. The next book that I read was Trusting the Billionaire by Macy St. James. So this one I read because I had downloaded a lot of books during one of those Stuff Your Kindle events, which if you're not like majorly into the book community, basically what it is a few times a year, there's a bunch of books that go free on Kindle that are normally, 99 cents or $3.99. In order to promote authors, I think publishers go out and put these out for free so you can kind of, find out new authors, especially indie ones and things like that. So during that event, I always like mass download a bunch of books. Even if I'm pretty selective about it, I still end up with like 25 to 30 books. So in the month of January, my goal was to try and clear some of those books out. If I didn't like them when I was reading them, I would just delete it off my Kindle, or I would read it so then that way it was marked as read. So this is one of them. This book was very short. It was under 70 pages. I think it could have benefited from like 50 to 100 more pages. I didn't hate it, I just didn't love it. So 3 out of 5 for me. I didn't mark down any spice score, so I'm guessing there wasn't any spice, but anyways, that's that. Okay, the next book that I read was Staying In for Valentine's Day by Eliza Boyd. This one was a 2 out of 5 star for me, but it is a clean romance, so there's no spice whatsoever if you're looking for one of those. This was another short book. This was under 200 pages, but for whatever reason, it felt incredibly long. It definitely had like Valentine's vibes to it and kind of that cute love story set in a small town, but I just felt like really nothing was happening. So if you're looking to kind of vibe out and just have a feel-good book without much spice, a little bit of butterflies, this might be the one for you, but it wasn't a love for me. Okay, the next book that I read was called Same Time Next Year by Tessa Bailey. This was a novella. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 on the stars, and I gave a 1.5 out of 5 on spice. I want to tell you about this because I don't think enough people know about this, but if you happen to be an Amazon Prime customer, and I believe you have to have a consumer account, and I only know about the United States. So if you're outside of the United States, I don't know if this applies to you as well. But Amazon has a program called First Reads for their Prime members. And on the first day of every month, they have a catalog of between 6 and 10 books that you can download for absolutely free. Sometimes they'll even let you pick 2 books. This was one of my picks for I think either November or December, so I got this book for free. I will link the First Reads program down in the description box. It's not a referral link or an affiliate link or anything like that, but just in case you want to look into it and see if you qualify, because I've gotten some great books through that program. So this was a hockey romance, and this follows Sumner, who is finally starting to get his hockey career to where he wants it, but his visa is about to expire and he needs to return back to Canada. So his teammates come up with a plan to try and get one of their favorite bartenders to marry him so he can have a visa. So for this book, for me, what I really enjoyed about it is that there's not a lot of miscommunication happening. I cannot stand miscommunication in books. With this book, I just felt like it was very healthy. It was very mature. They talked through their feelings, which I really appreciated. I felt like Sumner was like such a great book boyfriend. In some ways, I felt like I wanted more out of the book, but then I also feel like if there was more pages, it might have got redundant. But overall, if you're looking for like a fun, flirty, sexy type of read, this would be a great one to go with. The next book that I read was called King of Greed, and this was again by Anna Huang. Sorry again if I mispronounced that name. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 on the stars and a 1 out of 5 on the spice. So I loved the first book in this series, was lukewarm about the second one, but decided to continue on because I just enjoyed the characters in this lineup, so I felt like it was worth pursuing. I'm glad I did because I really, really enjoyed this one. This one follows Dominic, who has built himself up from absolutely nothing, but in building that empire of his, he's managed to neglect his wife, and it's gotten to the point where she decides to divorce him. He's trying to figure out a way to bring her back, but it may be too late. So this one is a marriage in trouble trope, if you will, and I am not the biggest fan of marriage in trouble, but I felt like this one was really handled well for that category. I will say though, I felt like the female main character needed to stand her ground a little bit more, and that's generally why I don't like the marriage in trouble one. I felt like she caved a little bit too easy for a lot of the situations that she was put into. I felt like this book also got a little bit repetitive. Overall, it drew out a lot of emotions from me, which is really what I enjoy about reading, and I really, really enjoyed the growth of the characters in this one. All right, the next one that I read was A Rogue of One's Own by Evie Dunmore. This is a historical romance, and I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 and 1 out of 5 on the spice. So this one follows Lucy, who has sacrificed everything in order to try and support women's rights. She's given up her family, she's given up her wealth, she's given up her reputation, and any hopes to marry a gentleman in their society. But as she's about to finally take a huge step in buying a publishing house, she finds out that one of her enemies from the past is now also an owner in the company. I absolutely love this series. The first one I think was called Bringing Down the Duke. And what I love about this series is the romance really takes a backseat, and it really focuses on that time frame and the women's suffrage movement. But it doesn't feel preachy. I just think that it was so well written. It's so immersive. And in this one, it's an enemies to lovers, which is my favorite type of book, but I also feel because it's my favorite, I have kind of high expectations, but I think it was done absolutely perfectly in this book. There were some moments in this that felt a little repetitive, so that's the only reason why it wasn't a full 5-star. But overall, I just felt like it was so romantic and so swoon-worthy is like the way that I would think. They use the word besotted. When you read that in a book, that just takes you away to a different time. Okay, so the next book that I read was called Love Austin by Brittany Mills. This one I gave a 3 out of 5 on the stars. It is a clean romance, so 0 out of 5 on the spice. So this follows Meg, who's a matchmaker, and Parker, who's a divorce attorney, and they have to team up in a fake dating scheme to make both of their businesses thrive. For me, I felt like this book had a lot of potential, but it just didn't ever get to the potential. I just felt like a lot of the dialogue was pretty awkward, and I just could not get behind the female character. She was very unstable and bratty. I don't know a lot of people in real life that would have spoken or reacted the way that she did to certain situations. So it wasn't a love for me. I will say though that the way the writing was done in terms of the scenery and things like that was done really, really well. So I will definitely look for more. I think with more development, there's definitely promise there. Okay, you guys. The next book that I read was Mixed Signals by B.K. Borison, and this was my favorite read in the month of January. This is a romantic comedy, and the first book in the series is called Love Light Farms, and it's set in a Christmas tree farm. Okay, I absolutely loved that one. That's one of my top recommendations if you're looking for a Christmas read. And this is the third book in the series. I didn't love the second book, but I truly loved this. And I think I actually loved this one more than I loved Love Light Farms. This one I gave a 5 out of 5 for the stars and 1 out of 5 on the spice. So this follows Layla, who has recently been striking out in the dating scene, and she's currently on a date with a total douche canoe who dines and dashes on her, and she gets stuck with the bill. She has a very strict rule about not dating in her small town, so she's a couple towns away on this date, so nobody from her town can gossip about her. But as she's checking out with the bartender, one of the guys from her town comes over, finds out what happened, and offers her a ride home. Okay, let's just be as dramatic as possible here and just let you know that this book absolutely melted my heart and soul, okay? I don't remember the last time that I felt like a sweep of romance just overtake me, but that's what happened in this book. I absolutely loved this book, and there was moments where I was absolutely cackling because there's some shenanigans in this book that I just thought were so funny. Caleb is the book boyfriend in here, and he's ultimate book boyfriend. I've had some favorite book boyfriends in the past, but I'm pretty sure Caleb just knocked them all out of the park. He is literally like, you know how people say if he wanted to, he would? Caleb is the definition of that saying. Just to wrap up my thoughts on this one, because clearly it's a total recommend. It's set in a small town. It has like that whole community vibe, we all come together type thing. I just don't think there could have been anything else done to this book to make it better. So I would definitely recommend you go pick it up. Okay, so the next book that I read was called The Summer You Found Me, and it's by Elizabeth O'Rourke, who happens to be one of my favorite writers, and I don't think enough people talk about her. So this book was a spicy romance. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 on the stars and 1 out of 5 on the spice. So she's on the lower side for spice. So if you're like trying to like dip your toes into spice, I think she would be a good place to start. So this follows Kate, who has recently got out of rehab after taking off from her husband for over a year. He thought she was dead, so when she shows back up in his life, it turns out that he's already moved on from her. So she comes up with a plan to totally destroy his relationship, but in the meantime, she has nowhere to stay, so she ends up moving in with his best friend. Quickly, she discovers that she's more comfortable with the best friend than she ever was with her husband. I felt like this book took me through every single emotion there is, and that's what Elizabeth O'Rourke books always do to me. I felt like Kate was just such a tortured soul. She had so much trauma that she was dealing with. You should probably look up trigger warnings before you jump into this book, I'm going to be honest. But I just loved the dynamic between everybody in the book. I loved how everything was done. It felt very messy. It felt very raw. It felt very real. The only reason this was not a 5-star for me is because both the female main character and the male main character have a lot of baggage, and they both have like coping mechanisms to basically shut them off from people. So sometimes it felt like they were a little cold and closed off, which made it difficult for the romance to feel like anything but a physical connection. But at the same time, I can understand why that was done, because it just felt, like I said before, very genuine, very real, very raw, very messy. I felt like there was incredibly complicated situations happening in this book, and I think that the author navigated it in a way where you didn't feel stressed out, but you also felt like it was handled in a genuine way. So overall, I just really loved this book, and I would definitely recommend it. Okay, the next book that I read was called A Ship of Bones and Teeth by Karina Hale. I'm not sure. This one is a dark historical romance. For stars, I gave it a 3 out of 5, and for spice, I gave it a 2 out of 5. So this follows a siren who has spent her days wishing to be above the sea. Sound familiar? She barters a deal with a sea witch to be able to live on land with a handsome prince. But once she's gotten the life that she wanted, she realizes that she was tricked by the sea witch, and it's not everything she thought it would be. Listen, this book started out so good. The premise is so good. All of the plot elements were so good. And it starts off so strong that I was already recommending it to people when I was only at like the 25% mark. But then it just takes a turn to absolute chaos, and it got to the point where it was almost like cringy. And I felt like the author had so many great plot ideas that she was just throwing the kitchen sink at you. And I almost wish she would have just taken the time to break this up into different books and different characters. Also, the other thing is that I'm not generally a dark romance reader. I've read a couple and I can do them. They're just not my go-to. I don't know how this is labeled dark romance because it was very tame. It was a very tame situation to me. I can kind of understand why it's labeled dark. You'd probably want to look up trigger warnings if you're sensitive. But overall, I don't think if you are a dark romance reader, I don't think this would be dark enough for you, if you know what I'm saying. All right, the next book that I read was called Fake Around and Find Out by S.M. Shade. This one is a spicy romance. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 for stars, and spice is a 2 out of 5. So this one follows Kara, who is disappointed at where she's ended up in life. She lives in a trailer park. She just lost her job. She's also drowning in debt. Well, she walks in on her very obnoxious but very handsome neighbor doing something promiscuous, and he offers her an opportunity to get in on the activity, and she is having a hard time turning him down. I was completely blown away by this book. It was completely unexpected. If you go on GoodReads, there's not very many ratings and there's not very many reviews on this book. I haven't heard anybody else talk about it. The only reason I found out about it is because one of my friends had found out about it and recommended it to me. So if you're looking to support an author that doesn't really have like a footprint out there and you want a really great read, please pick this book up. For me, this was such a well done enemies to lovers. I absolutely loved the characters. I loved the plot. I loved the way everything was worked through and all of that stuff. I will say for spice, I gave it a 2 out of 5. That's on my factor. If you haven't done spicy romance, the topics that happen in this one are pretty risque, if you will, so you may want to look up trigger warnings before heading into it, but overall I just absolutely loved and enjoyed this novel. Okay, the next book that I read was called The Bride's Runaway Billionaire by Pippa Grant. So this one is a spicy romance. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 on the stars and 1 out of 5 on the spice. Emma was a runaway bride who had her video of her wedding go absolutely viral. So her brother sent her to her honeymoon completely by herself so she could try and get away from the spotlight. She sees that there's a famous actor passed out on her porch and she's had a crush on him since forever, but she needs him to go away because he's going to draw attention to her that she definitely doesn't need. They end up forming a friendship and vacationing together and then having a one-night stand. He disappears. She needs to get in contact with him because she's a little souvenir. For me, the accidental pregnancy trope is not my favorite, so that's probably why this is like a 3.5 out of 5. I felt like the reason why he didn't know about the pregnancy was mostly believable, and that's usually the part I struggle with. But I just felt like this one, it's very low on the angst. It was very entertaining, and Pippa Grant has this great way of writing scenes in an entertaining and chaotic way. So it definitely had that. I love the small town. I love all of the characters. But it's just a very straightforward love story, and I think I'm a little toxic, you know what I mean? So I usually need a little bit more drama, and it just felt like it kept like approaching a drama point, but then pulling back. So I think I just needed a little bit more out of it, but overall this was a really fun read and I'm glad I did. All right, the next book that I read was Most Eligible Billionaire by Anika Martin. This one I gave a 3 out of 5 on stars and 1 out of 5 on spice. This one follows Vicky, who has done her best to hide her past from everyone. She's reinvented herself in New York City, and she has accidentally befriended an elderly woman who happens to be rich and has a dog that she is convinced Vicky is able to speak to. Now, this woman passes away and leaves the shares of her company to her dog in care of Vicky, the dog sitter. And the woman's son is not very happy about this. I felt like the plot was really good on this one. There was a secret that was hidden from the past that I felt like the author did a good job at like hinting to without being super repetitive. But for me, it felt like it was just very awkward. Like it just had an overall awkward vibe to it. I felt like there were some nicknames that the main male character was using that because of the way his personality was, I don't think he would ever actually use it. And a lot of it just kind of got a little bit cringy for me and a little bit too juvenile. So it wasn't a love for me, but I'm not mad I read it. Next up, we're going to discuss 6 short stories that I read. So there was a team of authors that got together and released short stories via Amazon, and they were called Improbable Meet Cute. So it's basically all of these stories are based on very 1 in a million chances that these people would even run into into each other, which I thought was a really cute premise. And I think it's supposed to be kind of to get everybody in the Valentine's type mood. So these ones I'm just going to kind of breeze through. I'll give you a couple hints on what's containing in them, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. My favorite one from the series was called Rosie and the Dreamboat, and it was written by Sally Thorne. This one I gave a 5-star. And for spice, there's 0 spice happening. This one has a firefighter and kind of like a train wreck personality woman who gets herself into a precarious situation, and the firefighter is there to save her. There's a lot of laugh out loud moments. I felt like the characters were like quirky and fun, and they complemented each other, but they had differences about them. It was just really cute and really well done. My next favorite from the series was by Abby Jimenez, and this one was called The Worst Wingman Ever. This one was another 5-star for me, also a clean romance, 0 out of 5 on the spice. So this one has like a healthcare worker and a property manager who happen to run into each other. There's an adorable dog, there's a feisty grandma. It just was really, really well done. All right, the next one was With Any Luck by Ashley Poston, not sure. 4 out of 5 on the stars, 0.25 out of 5 on the spice. Things are discussed, but don't really progress, if you know what I mean. So this one has a Valentine's wedding. There's a family curse going on. To me, it had like a very like 90s rom-com vibe happening to it. And I felt like it was like cute and quirky, and you didn't really know where it was going at first, but then once it does go somewhere, it ends up working out really well. I don't know, I thought this one was really cute. The next one was Drop, Cover, and Hold On by Jasmine Guillory. This one I gave a 3 out of 5 on the stars and 0.25 out of 5 on the spice. Again, there's a little bit there, but not much. It happens towards the end. It's not overwhelming. So this one it's set in a bakery. This one has like forced proximity. They get stuck because of an earthquake. There was like a grumpy sunshine situation happening and an instant love situation. So if you're not into instant love, I'm really not. So that one, it wasn't like a total love for me, but it's so short that it wasn't like I invested a bunch of time and hated everything. The next one was The Exception to the Rule by Christina Lauren. This one I gave a 3 out of 5 on the stars, and it was a 0.10 out of 5 on spice. There's barely any, but I just don't want to say 0 out of 5 because there are some things discussed that might make people uncomfortable. So I'm just gonna say that there's a sprinkling of spice in there. So this one has like a hidden identity situation, kind of a pen pal vibe. It also has like a long history. It's like over the course of, I want to say 10 years. The only thing I didn't love about this is the entire first half of the book is all email correspondence, and I didn't love that. The last one is Royal Valentine by Soraya Wilson. This one I gave a 2 out of 5 on the stars. This one has no spice whatsoever. It's fully clean. There's a royal romance happening. The guy has a Scottish accent. It's set in Rome. There's a secret identity situation happening. I wanted to enjoy this so much, but a lot of it just felt awkward and kind of unbelievable, and I didn't like the conflict that happens and the way it was handled, so this one was a 2 out of 5 for me. All right, the next book that I read was The Trade by Megan Quinn, and this is book number 4 in the Brentwood Boys series that I mentioned earlier in this video. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 on the stars and a 1.5 out of 5 on the spice. So this follows Corey, who has dedicated his entire life to baseball and has decided that he is going to wait to get married or have children until he can fully dedicate himself to finding the love of his life. Well, his plan goes completely out the window when he meets Natalie, who is the sister of one of his teammates, but he finds out she's married. Okay, so I absolutely loved the characters in this book, and I thought there was so many funny moments. But the only reason why this wasn't a love for me was just because it didn't capture me. I didn't feel taken away by it. It felt like the spicy scenes, because of the timeline and the way that it worked, they were all stacked together. So it felt like you were reading them forever and then you were kind of like in a drought forever. So I just didn't like the flow of that. But as usual, it took me through all of the emotions. I just feel like Megan Quinn is just one of the best romantic comedy writers out there, so I definitely enjoyed reading this book. Okay, the next book that I read was called Dating You, Hating You by Christina Lauren. I gave it a 5-star, and Spices I gave it a 1 out of 5. I am so mad at myself about this book, you guys, because it's been coming up on my Libby. I don't know if you guys use Libby, but it's basically an app where you can connect to your library card and you can request ebooks, but there's usually some type of like a wait list. So usually you have to wait weeks or months in order to be able to read most of the books, especially the popular titles. Well, I kept getting a notification saying my hold was ready, and for whatever reason, I don't know if it was the cover or what was going on, I kept putting it off. And it's so stupid because Christina Lauren is one of my favorite writers, so I don't know why I did this to myself. But anyways, all of that to say, I absolutely loved this book. So this follows Evie, who has made a pact with herself that she will never date a fellow agent. She works in like the TV and film industry. But then at a mutual friend's Halloween party, she ends up meeting Carter, who has the same rule, but they both cannot ignore the sparks that are flying between them. So they decide they're gonna go for it. Well, things get a little complicated when Carter finds out that his company and her company are merging together, and now they both are up for the same job. Okay, so the deal with this one is if you're like a major romance reader, the romance definitely takes a backseat in this one. It more has like workplace drama going on, and I just could not get enough of it. I felt like it was like guilty pleasure reading it. It was like just angsty enough and just frustrating enough. They discuss a lot about women in the workplace, women in corporate environments, and kind of like the disparities that women face when they're working for a corporate environment. And I felt like the way the male character starts to realize things that he's kind of had a blind spot to was just done so well. It didn't feel preachy, it felt honest. His response to things felt so honest. It didn't feel forced. I just thought it was done so well. I loved the chemistry and connection between the two of them. I could not recommend this book more. The next book that I read was called Cluelessly Yours by Max Monroe. This one I gave a 3.5 out of 5 on Stars and 1 out of 5 on Spice. I happen to really love Max Monroe's writing, kind of like Pippa Grant, where they have that like entertaining chaos that's happening, and it's really just funny, laugh out loud, feel good, low on the angst type thing. So if you need that type of vibe, I would definitely look up Max Monroe books. This one follows Sammy, who has just been having a hard time. She went through a divorce, and her sister has been on her case to try and start dating again, but she's having a hard time doing it when all of a sudden she finds herself dating 2 men at the same time, and her heart is pulling her in the opposite direction of what her mind thinks is best for her. This book, it just wasn't a favorite of mine because I felt like the first 60% of the book was just everyday life, and it didn't feel like a lot was happening. I did enjoy the twists that happened in the book. I wasn't expecting it. I think that that was handled really well. I did really enjoy the shenanigans and the dialogue. I feel like they're a writer duo, and I feel like they do an awesome job at that. Okay, so the next one that I read was called Raiders of the Lost Heart by Joe Segura. This one was a spicy romance. I gave a 4 out of 5 on the Stars and 1 out of 5 on the Spice. This follows Corey, who's a very talented and established archaeologist, but she has a reputation due to a magazine article that showed some risky photos of her. She's flown down to Mexico on a secret dig. She finds out when she gets down there that her arch nemesis is the one running the dig, and he is the one who has taken several opportunities from her in the past. I absolutely loved the adventurous spirit of this book. It has kind of like National Treasure and Indiana Jones vibes happening. I absolutely loved Corey. I felt like she was such a fun and strong character, but a lot of her storyline just felt incredibly repetitive. And then Ford, who's the main male character, he just irritated me to no end because basically he does a bunch of messed up stuff, is aware he does a bunch of messed up stuff. He leans into a lot of the disparities that women face in their field and uses it to his advantage. So it just felt kind of icky to me. And I just don't feel like it was ever recovered very well. What I loved about this book is there's a mystery happening, and it was written in such a great way that I did not want to put the book down. And the way the writing was for the detail in the scenery was incredibly immersive. So I felt like that was the strongest suit. I just don't think the two characters' development was the best, and it wasn't handled that well to me, but I think there is so much potential with this writer, and I think this is going to be a series because of the way it ends. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger, but more just like a hint for the future, so I am definitely excited to continue on with her work. The last book that I read in the month of January was The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This one was a thriller. I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Stars, and there is actually spice in this one, which normally doesn't happen for thrillers. It's not full-on scenes, but it's definitely on the riskier side, so I gave it a 1 out of 5 when it comes to spice. This follows a promising young writer who has been invited to an exclusive retreat with 4 other promising writers at the home of Rosa Vallow. She's an established author in a very specific genre who wants to provide mentorship and opportunities to other females in the industry. Once she gets there, though, she realizes that all of the methods that Rosa is using for this writing retreat are quite questionable, and it makes her wonder if she should have taken advantage of this at all. Okay, so my deal with this one is I felt like the beginning part of this book was so strong, but then towards the end, it's like paced really well at the beginning, but then towards the end, stuff just kind of starts getting thrown at you, and it kind of got to the point where it was overwhelming. There's also some real estate dedicated to a book within a book, and I didn't care for any of the book within the book. I just felt like it was incredibly unnecessary, or it could have been written better. If they were going to do the book in the book thing, it felt like the book in the book had a completely different writing style than the rest of the book, and it just was a little weird to me. Overall, I think this was an incredibly well-rounded thriller that has a very unique plot, and it took me on twists and turns that I definitely did not expect. So if you're looking for one to really mess with your mind, this would be one to pick up. All right, you guys, so that is everything that I read in the month of January. I used to share what I was hoping to read in the month of February, but I've gone back into just trying to read what my mood dictates, so I don't have a list of hopefuls. However, I do have an Instagram account dedicated solely to books. So on there, I share my current reads, and then I also have some templates in case you want to do some book challenges and things like that, or share what you're currently reading. And I also share my reviews a few times a week of the books that I've read in the past. I hope that you found your next great read in this video, and if you have a book that you think I should read, please be sure to leave it in the comments down below. I hope you have a magical day. Bye!